Hello and welcome to this special edition of your Balkanweek. As you know, this is a recording that I try to make weekly, usually around Fridays, mostly succeed in doing it on Fridays. I'm doing a special one today in response to a special set of events regarding the protests about the Rio Tinto mining project, lithium mining project. In the area around Loznica, this is an area of particular interest. It is not just any place. It's an important agricultural area. It's also the site of a number of outstanding objects and places of natural beauty. So the kind of mining that they're planning to do would be destructive. The particular catalyst for the protests was the passing of a set of laws to make it easier to change the laws to make the mining operation possible and to compel people to sell properties to the state to allow for the development of the mining operation. I won't go into a lot of detail on this. One of the reasons that I do these videos is to encourage people to follow the news, and you can follow the news. However, there are a few points that I want to make about this. The first point has to do with the conditions for successful mobilization of people in the country and in the region. Because I think a lot of people, especially if you follow mainstream media, when they're looking to explain events in the region and when they're looking for things to happen, they're looking for these so-called national reasons and motivations. They're looking for events about symbols. They're looking for celebration and rejection of contentious figures from the Second World War or from later wars. They're looking for affirmation and denial of crimes. These things certainly happen, but a lot of this is looking in the wrong place. And looking in this place requires making an assumption about people in the region. It requires making the assumption that they wake up in the morning and think, how am I going to spend the whole day just being very, very national? And that's not how people behave. People don't behave that way unless they're idiots. What really motivates people most of the time are questions that have some impact on the material conditions of their life. And we have to understand the purpose of all of these national mobilizations, of the occasional media panics about symbols, about claims that the entire world is in a conspiracy against the state, about panics that the alphabet is threatened, and so on, as a little bit of produce 2 minutes hate for political purposes and to direct attention and to direct energy generally away from something else. What's happening in this case is interesting because you can see that it is a protest that is worthy of attention and consideration for 2 reasons. One reason is that it happens in more than one place, and second, that it has a broad social base. That is, that it is not only the urban middle class that is protesting. That's what makes these events worthy of attention, and I think that's what's brought the attention of the regime too. They understand that it's important, which is why their response was panicked, leading to my second point, that the response to these protests involved violence. Now, the regime has access to a number of instruments of violence. It has access to legal ones through the police and security services, and to extra legal ones through its control of organized crime and hooligans, and it used both of them. The most outstanding incident was in the town of Shabats, where the police were initially standing off against protesters trying to block the roadway, and then the police withdrew, allowing the hooligans to enter with heavy construction equipment, with batons for hitting people, with hammers. And the incident followed this. Now, this is meaningful because we could say that a characteristic of this type of regime is that it has access to instruments of violence. But in fact, these instruments are not used frequently. They're used rarely. And when they are used, it comes at a risk, because by using the instruments of violence, the regime does demonstrate its capacity to engage in violence, but it also reveals the limitations on this capacity. And that's why this moment is especially risky. The third point that I want to make about these protests is one thing that you could see is that this was organized by citizens movements who had congregated around the issues involved. the opposition political parties were not present on this issue. As with every other issue of public importance over the last several years, they have not taken a leading role. And what applies to the opposition parties applies to the governing parties as well. On the same day that the protests happened, the ruling party, one that is interestingly enough called the Serbian Progressive Party, had this celebratory Congress in which the president, Aleksandar Vučić, gave a speech. And he decided um, to use as the theme of his speech, and this is on a day when the state had actively engaged in a display of force and violence in order to perform its humiliating and damaging subordination to powerful international investors, to make the theme of his speech how independent he was. Um, this tells us something about politics in the region. It tells us why we sometimes waste a little bit of time by looking at parties, because the political parties, both the ones in power and in the opposition, do not have contact with or understanding of citizens and their needs and concerns. They live in a fairly enclosed world of their own that is financed by patronage and are separate from this. So if you want to understand what is happening in the societies of the region, of other regions as well, look at the activity on the ground. It's not all going to be taking place in the institutional representation. This is all you will hear from me for a little while. We're going on strike. Everybody enjoy the strike. And yes, we'll be back to you in a couple of weeks.